Hello and welcome back for another GiantSlayerTV Top 10 video. Today's video will be a countdown of the top champions for ranked play in patch 12.6. Meta is still feeling the effects of the B patch, so not everything is set in stone. That said, we have seen AP compositions consistently come out on top as AD boards just aren't doing as well currently. Another facet of the meta that changes the shift towards the late game with a lot of emphasis on level 8 and 9. We'll be exploring champions relevant to those changes and more as we dive into our top 10. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT shows and tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our GiantSlayerTV social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. We have a lot to discuss in regards to the meta shift, but first let's introduce the champion coming in at number 10, Warwick. The Wolf of TFT Street took a pretty sizable hit in the 12.6B patch that nerfed him in several ways. Despite those nerfs, Warwick is still playable, just don't expect to freely win your way to a top 4. To do well with Warwick means fighting tooth and claw to get those juicy ranked points. We also wanted to make sure we highlighted the impact Warwick had on the recent meta, as we were close to entering War Week several times. Expanding upon those nerfs further, we're seeing the meta trend away from low-cost boards entirely. Sure, a few of them still exist, but reroll boards are becoming more and more scarce as the meta settles post-B patch. Warwick is one of the few bastions left for those that enjoy the low-cost reroll boards because units like Talon, Twitch, and others just don't quite cut it anymore. Some of them are certainly still viable, but none of them are consistent. Which brings us to the rest of our 10, which, for the most part, are high-cost champions. Warwick represents the best of the low cost, and for that, he earns a well-deserved spot at number 10. The next 3 champions on our list are all 3-cost units. They all represent another facet of the meta shift, which is heavily emphasizing AP boards. Up first, we have Malzahar coming in at number 9. Malzahar is another champion that got hit by the nerf bat, but luckily is still standing. That said, his role shifted a bit. Before, Malzahar was an item holder, a secondary DPS, or primary DPS in the case of Synaptic Web Mutant. After the nerfs, Malzahar is basically just an item holder with extra utility because as a damage dealer, he got a lot weaker even with Synaptic Web. That's alright though, because, as we said, the meta has shifted towards AP more so than AD. Having a consistent item holder in stage 2, 3, or 4 is fantastic until you transfer items to a proper carry. Malzahar does well in that role and afterwards still provides value with his ability reducing the magic resist of enemies affected by it. Overall, that makes him a pretty good champion for any AP board. Next up is the number 8 champion that bridges the gap between AP and AD, Echo. Echo is not exactly an AP champion, nor does an innovator board necessarily mean magic damage. But on average, the meta builds utilizing Echo are going to lean heavily into AP more than anything else. That's because Innovator Flex uses champions like Orianna and Seraphine, which are both magic damage champions. Of course, there are AD carries like Jace, Jhin, and even Draven that are used with Innovator, but it's still at best a mixture of the 2 damage types. Compositions aside, Echo is just an all-around fantastic champion every single meta. Twitch reroll may be less common, but plenty of early and mid-game boards can utilize Echo effectively. Slap a Frozen Heart and Morellamicon on him and Echo will remain relevant the whole game. It's hard not to praise a 3 synergy champion, especially when one of those synergies is Innovator. Our last 3-cost champion comes in at number 7, Vex. Looking at the history of patches for set 6, it's fascinating to see how often Vex has received changes and yet still manages to bounce back into relevancy time and time again. Both of the 12.6 patches actually nerfed Vex in some way, and yet she's still the linchpin for any Arcanist board. Speaking of Arcanists, those nerfs didn't really do much to slow them down in the meta. If they had, well, we probably wouldn't be talking about Vex. In general, what makes Vex so useful is her consistency as a frontliner. No, she doesn't CC and her damage can basically be ignored, but her ability to stall is as good, if not better, than a lot of other frontline champions, most of which cost more than she does. Turns out gaining a big shield is pretty darn good at surviving and buying time. In addition to that, Vex can also hold defensive items well, particularly dodge chance items that make her ridiculously hard to kill when paired with so small. There are a few other benefits to using Vex. One is her early game strength, especially with other Yordles to help build an early economy. Despite doing well early, Vex also scales in the late game when 3-starred, meaning you don't often have to replace her. Having a consistent frontliner is important at any stage of the game, and that's what Vex provides. Just be wary of getting too attached to Vex because they are fond of nerfing her out of the meta, but hey, at least they buff her again a few patches later. The rest of our top 10 is all about 4 and 5 cost champs. Coming in number 6, we've got Seraphine. There's two key reasons why Seraphine is a worthwhile champion to use for a lot of compositions. Those reasons are the synergies Innovator and Socialite. Innovator isn't quite back to where it used to be, but with the meta shifting back towards the late game, having a solid mid-game board like Innovator that can flex into a late game is great. Seraphine is an important champion for that since she adds a lot of utility. Socialite is also slightly less valuable with Aurelia nerfs, but really any composition can effectively use the Socialite hacks if it's in an accessible spot. Seraphine, Senna, and Gnar are often interchangeable, but Seraphine is the only one that holds on to AP items effectively, specifically Morellonomicon. It's also common to see both Seraphine and Senna used together when playing Innovator. At the end of the day, Seraphine isn't quite as high in value as a lot of other high-cost champs, but she is a key part of several meta comps. Next up is another Innovator champion that comes in at number 5, Jace. Jace is more than just an Innovator champion, but it is worth mentioning since there is no late game Innovator without Jace. Not only is he often the main damage dealer at that point of the game, but having Jace can unlock the dragon, assuming there's an Innovator emblem. With nerfs to Warwick, the dragon is once again an easy win condition in the late. That said, it can be difficult to get. Another bonus to playing Jace is being able to flex him between the front line and back line. Do you have decent AD items and lack of proper carry? Send Jace to the back and slap those items on him. Need extra front line? Jace can do that too. Being versatile between the two roles is quite useful in a flex meta anyway, and Jace can also just be used as a utility if you already have a carry set. In general, it can be difficult to 2-star any 5-cost champion, but the meta has shifted towards the late game. Aiming forward, hitting those upgrades can certainly happen free game. From AD to AP as our number 4 champion is Victor. We weren't kidding when we said the top 10 was expensive. Victor has become the carry for the late game when playing AP, basically replacing Ahri entirely. Ahri still has a place, but she just isn't as reliable compared to Victor. But it is difficult to make it into the late game to find Victor without a strong mid-game board, which often does utilize Ahri, so she's not completely gone from the meta. Victor, on the other hand, has a huge presence in the late game, even at level 1. He can be played with Arcanist or Chemtech, but can also be tossed into any flex board if there's a Silko to buff his starting mana. The duo of Silko and Victor was what really makes the champion shine, because all you want from Victor is for him to cast at least once. With one cast, a good portion of the enemy board often gets wiped out. All in all, like Jace, it can be difficult to 2-star Victor. Finding him in time to transition can also be difficult, but again, the meta has shifted towards the late game, so finding 5-cost units is not unlikely anymore. And as mentioned, a level 1 Victor can carry you to the top 4. Up next is the champion coming in number 3, Jinx. Twinshot seemingly took a hit with nerfs in both of the 12.6 patches, but it's still doing well. Jinx is one of the reasons as to why this composition does well, since she adds a lot of staying power in the late game. She's also quite good as a flex damage dealer for a multitude of boards, as she can flex both AP and AD items. Besides a lot of buffs and Neon Nights, Jinx actually got a lot better simply because Rival broke her dependence on being played alongside Vi. Now Jinx gets the buff on her own, meaning she's one of the best late game splash champions whenever you're in need of extra damage. Even without Twinshot active, Jinx still brings a lot to any board. It's honestly quite the glow, because Jinx in Gizmos and Gadget was honestly one of the worst champions in the set. Unlike Victor, Jinx does need to be level 2 if you want to utilize her effectively as a damage dealer. It does hold her back, but as we've said, it's more and more likely for players to hit those late game upgrades due to the meta shift. Being able to 2-star Jinx more often, plus her status as one of the best late game flex damage dealers, is what earns her the number 3 spot on our list. Coming in at number 2 is Orianna. Once again, we're highlighting Orianna in the meta because few champions bring as much value to the table as she does. Having 2 easy to splash in traits with Clockwork and Enchanter means Orianna is a common addition to any board at level 7 or 8. Even with AD compositions falling to the wayside, Clockwork still gets a lot of value, particularly with Innovators. We all know how useful the Enchanter trait is. Orianna also adds a lot of utility and packs a decent punch, meaning she uses leftover AP items quite well. Generally, she isn't used as the main damage dealer, but as a utility champion, items like Chalice or Locket or anything AP related does make her more effective and can win rounds with 1 or 2 well-placed ultimates. Any board can easily be improved in the late game simply by adding Orianna with either Clockwork or Enchanter. It's also beneficial to have Orianna because she goes so well with our number 1 champion, Silko. That's right, Silko from Arcane is back. After a brief time away from the meta, Silko has returned and has a huge influence on the late game meta. Practically every composition can utilize Silko at level 8 or 9, especially boards with champions that benefit from the increased starting mana, like Renata, Victor, Jinx, and Orianna. Of course, there are plenty more champions that do well with the Mastermind buff, but those 4 are definitely the most common. Now, you may be thinking that Silko's ability is a liability that can cost you the round. While yes, that is true, it doesn't happen all that often. Generally, the Silko buff is more likely to win the round than lose it, especially the 1 second duration buff that they gave to Silko 2. That 1 second makes a huge difference in a fight and is largely the reason why we see Silko returning to the meta. Of course, the meta shifting towards the late game is also important, but Silko is one of the few 5 costs that actually thrives in the earlier stages of the game. Since he's entirely about utility, a Silko 1 is plenty during stage 4 and 5 until you have a more fleshed out level 8 board. Then you do want to 2-star him since that extra second of duration on his ability is a necessity. Overall, Silko is by far the best utility splash champion in the meta, and if the trend continues to shift into the late game, his value is likely to keep increasing. Alright folks, that's all we have for you for today. Normally we would have honorary mentions, but honestly the meta is still being figured out. Champions like Draven and Jhin seem to be doing well, but haven't quite found their stride. Or Zeri, who can do well in the late game, but isn't super consistent. Our best advice is to keep trying out new compositions and champions to see what works best for you in the current meta. Let us know in the comment section below what your top 10 champions are. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.